think this ad is Canadian? Didn't think so.
What we like about this commercial is that it uses sex to address an important sex-related issue, AIDS, in a very direct way.
Well, we want to know, why isn't sex used more often to actually address sex?
While browsing through some racy commercials, we began to wonder, are there any sexy commercials out there that talk about sex? If there's a lack of sexy ads addressing sex, what does this say about society?
And we decided to take a critical stance to argue that advertising exploits sex to the detriment of society on an individual and on a broad-scale social level in 3 ways.
We think that the overuse of sex to sell commercial items takes the meaning out of sex. It minimalizes the importance of having open dialogue about sex in light of STDs and important sex-related issues. Open dialogue about sex is the best way to promote sexual safety.
While the abundance of sex in advertising makes our society seem liberated, the liberation is superficial. There's little actual dialogue about how sex impacts health and relationships. The lack of directly addressing sex with advertising could even be evidence that Western society is sexually repressed, a la Freud.
In addition, on a broader scale, the use of sex is one way that the advertising industries increase consumption, which has many different consequences. For example, sex increases consumption, but overconsumption decreases happiness.
We think that advertising can actually be used to open up dialogue about sex by using sex, if necessary, to address sex, relationships, and health-related issues in commercials. Advertising should stop exploiting sex to sell products as it distracts us from important sex-related issues, keeps us self-centered, and perpetuates an unhealthy cycle of social discontent.
The overuse of sex to sell commercial items takes the meaning out of sex. It minimizes the importance of having open dialogue about sex in light of STDs and sex-related issues.
Lack of open dialogue in society about sex means that for some people, advertising is the primary source of ideas about sex. The overuse of sex in advertising, combined with a lack of comprehensive sex education in schools and at home, has resulted in the trivialization of sexuality.
Feminist author Jean Kilbourne says that a lack of education and communication has resulted in school-aged children indulging in random casual sex. Essentially, sex in advertising trivializes sex and gives it a narcissistic feel. Why is there a lack of accurate sexual information available to young consumers through advertising? North American society is not comfortable talking about sex. The amount of sex in European advertising is a reflection of the level of open dialogue about sex. We think that North America's lack of open dialogue about sex is reflected in its conservative advertising. In the US, teens are taught desire, but not safety. According to a Wiretap magazine article about sex education in Europe versus the US, parents are among the first people Dutch children told when they are sexually active. The open sexual dialogue in Europe means not only that commercials are less censored, but that advertisements for safe sex and contraceptives air freely. Perhaps the fact that sexy, explicit commercials are balanced with commercials encouraging safe sex and realistic sexuality allows Europe to sustain their open dialogue about sex. Americans take a more puritanical view about the simple pleasures of life, like eating, sex, nudity, and alcohol, which Europeans take in their stride as a part of their lifestyle. Americans restrict their pleasures in normal situations and later bomb out in excess indulgences to solve psychological issues.
This pattern of restriction and overindulgence applies to other types of consumption. For example, purchasing products that we don't really need. Sex pulls us into advertising, seducing us into buying objects. We comply in attempts to satisfy desires that money can't buy. The eroticization of products works to increase consumerism. According to Freud, human beings have all sorts of desires and fantasies that are never fully compatible with reality. Because we can't make fantasy real, we are forced to submit to the reality principle to survive. Reality is harsh, according to Freud, which causes discontent. There's no escape from this discontent except through work, intoxication, and fantasy. Conveniently, advertising is full of fantasy, an escape from harsh reality, where you can have all the sex, love, and happiness you like. if you buy the products shown on TV.
Dr. Sid Jolly is an American communications expert with a consequentialist view of advertising in capitalist society. Advertising is a culture of its own that causes us to turn to commercial products to satisfy unfulfilled desires. Jolly says advertising culture prevents us from achieving the happiness we seek by subtly coercing us to pursue happiness through products. Eroticism is an effective way to keep us in a cycle of buying products to feel happy, not feeling happy, and therefore buying more products. Jolly calls advertising a fantasy factory because it sells ideas more than products that are supposed to fulfill human desires. As Jolly explains, the cruel illusion of advertising is how it links those things that we really want, family, love, to a place that we can never get them, the marketplace.
In addition, advertising's exploitation of sex is damaging on a broader social scale because it is used by the industry to 1. Keep people focused on the present moment, 2. Encourage over-consumerism, 3. Celebrate individualism, and 4. Distract us from important health and social issues. In other words, advertisers use sex to uphold the current capitalist system and corporate interests instead of drawing attention to important personal and social issues. As sex becomes more explicit and shocking, it is increasingly hard to avoid. Sex itself in society becomes more and more distorted and trivialized. We participate in an advertising culture that doesn't help us understand what's really important. When this distortion of sex in reality is coupled with a lack of open dialogue about sex, you have harmful consequences on both personal and societal levels.
The solution to overcoming the threat of advertising culture, from a Marxist perspective, would be the audience-led instigation of a revolution that would match the scale of the capitalist revolution. Incapacitated audiences may eventually become conscious of the repressive function of the media that directs their thoughts and budgets to their own detriment while benefiting others, namely media industries. Something would have to act as a catalyst, causing consumer consciousness, resulting in first, social collectivity, and then collective action against advertising industries. As long as consumers believe that their own power of autonomy in action and thought is superior to that of the industry's influence, it is unclear whether an ideological shift could happen. We came to the following conclusions. The advertising industry exploits sex to sell products.
Partly due to its Puritan roots, North American society on the whole is closed to talking about sex directly.
The combination of society's reluctance to talk openly about sex plus the advertising industry's trivialization and distortion of sex is harmful on an individual level. From a Marxist perspective, this dominant destructive ideology will only end if consumers regain consciousness of the gravity of the implications of advertising culture and invent an alternative to the current system. We don't know if people will ever bring down advertising culture. By borrowing from Freudian theory, it's possible that increasing dialogue about sex in schools and families could increase sexual fulfillment. Being comfortable with our own sexuality means we'd be less susceptible to erotic advertising and less likely to turn to products to satisfy unfulfilled desires. If we no longer try to use products to satisfy desires, consumers' behavior may decrease, along with the individual and societal consequences of consumerism.
In conclusion, we'd like to see more commercials like this French ad for AIDS, talking openly about sex, using sexual content positively to draw attention to social issues. We could take it as evidence that society is growing more comfortable with sex and sexuality.